Community dinner. We haven't done a live talk. No, let's see. It's been a few weeks. And welcome back for those of you that watch the recordings, which you will be watching the recording by default because there's 3 of us here tonight. So, and there's no Zoom room open. Well, no one was waiting or anything. So tonight, I just want to start with the general, like this is Health Alchemy, and why am I around and why do I call Health Alchemy what it is because we're here to share, first and foremost, what is health? A lot of people can't even define, that's been my question for 30 years, like what is health really? So if you look at the root of the word health, it's heal, and the root of heal is wholeness. You go out to the Eastern cultures, they call that yoga. So actually health means the same thing as yoga, loosely. So we'll start with that. And what's the point of health? Well, the dictionary definition is pathetic. It's the absence of symptoms. Like you go to American Heritage or the dictionary is like absence of disease. So I call that a low standard view of health. It's about this big, right? And I got these teachers where, their view of health is like, if your body, mind, and spirit is not in sync in the present moment, then you're not healthy. And I'm like, that's much better. But I'd add on to that to get it even higher is I'm feeling very aligned in my earth suit, and there's even a joy and an enthusiasm present. What does enthusiasm mean? En theos. Theos means God. So I know when I'm enthused about something that it's God living through me. Like when I get up here and start talking, there's a point where I forget I'm talking. Don't you love that when you just forget you're you? That's like the best time of life.
Channeling energy.
Escape to the movies, right? Well, how about escape to the present moment? Yeah, right. So we're here to explore all the different avenues of health. So the community dinner talks, I've been in community dinner talks since I was 35 years old. So, over 20 years of these things and leading events and facilitating groups of people. We've got to start with, why are we doing this? What's our intention for even doing this? Why is Craig giving this away for free? Why am I hosting community dinners? It's because part of health is community. I have people that are close to me that they choose to be the hermit. And I did that. And I only saw that my own evolution just pauses there because I don't have anything to bounce stuff off against. And so one of my spirit guides, very loosely put, I don't hear voices, I'm not insane. And usually people who say they're not insane are the ones who are insane. But I got this guidance once to really take heed of what came up in each moment and to learn to trust that more. And so part of health is also things are coming up for us. And if we don't have enough stuff in the way, as you said earlier, then what arises for us in the moment, we can usually trust more. Like, for example, I had what I called pathological food cravings and then real food cravings. And that's what they do in the Western cultures. They get you on these chemical-based foods, which I call our mouth entertainment, and it disconnects you from your body. You're already disassociated from, well, let's see, caffeine and alcohol and sugar, white flour all day. And then, so you're disassociated. And that's how people are more easily controlled, because when we're disassociated, then we're not here in the moment. We're living in the past or the future. And that's where most people live their life, on the wheel of suffering, which is the past, the future. They're not present. And so health is one of the means by which food and nutrition, which is my scope of practice, is food can nourish this vesicle for spirit, but thought is not housed in here, folks. And that might be a shock to some of you, but thought is non-localized. And if you've been knocked out of your body or died and come back, you know that. And that's why people change. Like the near-death experience people, Raymond Moody, you know that guy's work? Life after life. 1,000 people were interviewed who had near-death experiences. So he came up with sort of a theory of like the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Brilliant work. There's an hour-long video on YouTube. You can see this guy's work. Well, I'm one of those people. I've been knocked out of my body. I've seen my body from the outside. And so as many other people, and there's documentation that, consciousness, like you're dead, these guys are dead on the operating table, and then they're able to perceive what's going on around them. Like, what the F is that? And then same thing happens on DMT and ayahuasca, a lot of that. The centered identification with this one unit ends. And if you're not prepared for that, that's when people go insane, right? Because suddenly identity is ripped away. Well, what is these voices and who? There's not even that question, right? I mean, on Salvia Divinorum, once I exhaled to Divinorum, and the guy holding the bong, laying in a bed propped up, disappeared. And all there was just a field of consciousness, is the only way I can put it. There was Craig ceased to exist. And the first piece that came back minutes later was my right big toe. I just had this perception of some feeling, and I was like, what is that? And then I felt my heart beating, and then I felt my love for my girlfriend. And I was like, big toe, something here, love for this person. But I didn't even know what I was at that point. And so that's what is actually sort of, I was telling these guys, there's something that's living in the present moment. It's from the transpersonal part that's actually running the show. And I know that because there's pointers of this. And one of the Zen pointers are, you're not the doer. And then I add on, so stop taking credit for what already happened inside you. Like, oh, I grieved and I let go of that so good. No, you didn't. You just aligned with what already let go. And Jesus even said so in one of the Gospels, you're already forgiven. That's what that means. You don't need forgiveness because you've already been forgiven by the present moment. And after death, we have all these bardos we face, but we're the judge. We're not being judged. That's what's funny about the whole game. It's like we're playing judge and judge at the same time. And as soon as in the process after we're dying, we have a chance to liberate ourselves just with that one realization. Oh, it's all a movie, and I'm making the movie too.
When you don't realize it, you're just living in your own private hell.
Yeah. They call those a bardo in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, B-A-R-D-O, but we're living out bardos. So all death is just a more accelerated bardo than this life. And that's why St. Matthew said, die before you die. That's very threatening to the ego. What do you mean? I don't want to die. And it's just identification is what that really means. It's just poorly translated. The ego is no longer the focus of perception. It's more in the back seat, but it's not running the show anymore. And it doesn't like that because the ego is like a verb. It likes a lot of, that's why silence is like the hangman for the ego. It just sits there and churns for, you guys ever sat in silence for any length of time? Right? The ego just churns and churns and it gets noisier for a while.
Eventually it stops though.
And eventually, yeah.
Monkey mind stops after, well, when you're not practiced, after about 20 minutes.
Generally, yeah. One guy that was in horrendous pain, he'd meditate for an hour, and after an hour, he'd be out of pain. Excruciating pain. I was impressed with that story. I've just mentioned, can I mention your name? Well, Deanne DeVille's here with me, and I just really, Deanne, thanks for being here. And Jim, we have our little core group tonight, and so our view tonight, to go full circle, orator, digression, master Craig Lane, we're going into sodium potassium part of health. Yeah, the master of digression. On a good night, I can really digress and pull it all together, and on a bad night, it gets scattered bits. So we were talking earlier about, we'll start with the sodium potassium pump. And, we're like, there is no pump, folks. There's not like a bunch of pumps along your cell membrane. Everything's mechanical in this world, right? You got this cell membrane composed of phospholipid particles, and you got this phosphorus thing, a little pump over here, and the iodine, the Sim Porter S escalator is my other favorite one. Sodium potassium pump. They'll transition nicely. It's not really a pump there, folks, and we don't live in a mechanistic universe, and that's why I'm going to be teaching a chemistry module. The book over there is by you. Right by your shoulder, the chemistry of essential oils. You pull it out for me. This man changed my life. I was studying essential oil therapy 20 to 22 years ago, and this was one of the books they recommended. And if you look at the subtitle, The Chemistry of Essential Oils Made Simple, God's Love Manifest in Molecules. This book changed my life because he describes chemistry. This is a chemistry textbook. He describes chemistry through the eyes of the woo-woo. And his premise is that life is frequency and life is a process, And that's where I started getting onto this. And that chemistry is a snapshot of a life process. And it's more about frequency than it is. So essential oils, he says, the reason why people have problems with synthetic fragrances is because of stereoisomers. So he ties together these left and right-handed molecules. So the L molecule is generally the one like L-carnitine, L-glutamine, but there's a D one that's the wrong-handed molecule, and it gets stuck in the machinery, so to speak. It causes congestion. And so I call it life's trump card. I'll be teaching this in the chemistry module. So the more synthetic things we use, the more of these wrong-handed molecules are thrown in. They're called stereoisomers. And these isomers can't be used. The D form, we use the L form. And so that's how life kills people. And I'll go so far as to say, I think this is where the viral thing and the exosomes comes into play, is these wrong-headed molecules are of the wrong frequency. You could call it Satan, right? Yin and yang. Love, God, Satan, darkness. That's why I do these talks. I never thought of this before until just now. Right? Just popped in like, well, there's the connection, you know? So
Yeah,
they feed these synthetic everything.
It's not really yin and yang because yin is not Satan. Yin is the feminine energy.
Well,
and
let me
it's mystery.
Okay, let's digress for a second.
Yeah.
Yin and yang, one of my Japanese teachers who grew up in Japan said this: yin and yang don't mean anything. They mean nothing. You can use alpha, beta. We're talking about the dualistic forces of the universe.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about. I don't care about the label yin and yang. I'm talking about the dualistic forces of the world. And so this is a dualistic thing. You've got two hands. This is dualism. So you could pick, you have to pick one as yin and one as yang. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm not attached to what you've labeled them as.
Yeah.
But they are polarized forces.
Yeah.
Because they're opposite each other.
Right. Right. That part I understand. Yeah.
But you could go with the, you know, and one's usable and one's not usable. That's also yin and yang.
Right.
It's a polarity.
It's a polarity. But the true meaning behind yin and yang, even
I know.
a Japanese friend doesn't say this maybe, but
Right.
the true meaning is wholeness. And there is evil and negative and bad and Satan in
Right.
wholeness.
Right.
But there's also good in the darkness as well. Because
Right.
it's all in balance, it's all in wholeness. So that's why I jumped in on the yin yang association. It's like,
Okay, yeah, that's
because
strict
yin and
view.
yang
Yeah.
is not dualistic, not at all. It's not this or that. It's everything. And if you define it as this or that, then you miss the point of yin and yang.
Yeah, this is verbiage. You know,
Yeah.
I hate getting stuck in
Yeah.
words because I had English as a minor in college, and I learned enough about language to go like, I'm not gonna. And Adyashanti says words are at best pointers towards reality. At best.
It's limited.
Yeah, very limited.
Yes,
So
yes. When you
I
try
choose what I do, and I'm loose with words, and that's you. People like you help me get more tight with my words, because I trigger a lot of people with my poor word choice because I'm just very loose. And so thanks for that. Actually, I am presumptuous. I live from the inherent wholeness, and I take that for granted. So when I say yin and yang, it's just like, because that's the world that we have to navigate. The world of wholeness is easy, right? You know, in the world of everything's awesomeness, in the world of the absolute, you know, the Tao, it's all good.
Right.
But that's why we come
here.
here. But that's why we come here, though. That's what we find out. Like, I came here for the drama. I came here for the polarity, because I'm bored back there. There's no fucking fun because everything's good. There's nothing to compare the good to. So if it's always good, you don't even know what.
This is why we incarnate in this life.
Exactly.
What's the lesson we want to learn?
We come to forget. But we resist it and try and remember, get enlightened all fast. And it's like, oh, but there's a whole process of smelling the roses. I see. Fortunately, some of us wake up and die before we die, so we can actually live. You have to lose your mind to actually really live, you know, that kind of thing. That's the identity part. And so back to sodium potassium, that's the vitality force in the body. And so we take snapshots of this force. We can get it in the bloodstream, which is sodium, you know, a healthy sodium level. You can lose these 140 to 142, whatever the parameter, milligrams per deciliter. I don't know what it is. And then potassium is like, what is it, 4.1 to 4.5, you know, kind of ideal range. And if it varies beyond that, then generally something major is happening in the body. And so then there's the sodium potassium ratio, there's the blood, there's a certain ratio in the hair. And the ratio in the hair, we know from Paul Eck's work, the analytical research labs, it's 2.5. So 2.5 parts sodium in the hair to 1 part potassium is the ideal ratio. And that ratio should not vary much. Even a rise to 3 is an indication of too much cortisol activity, too much epinephrine, adrenaline, and all that. They're running too hot. And then as the ratio gets lower below 2, you're running into adrenal fatigue. We define it as adrenal fatigue, but it's lack of polarity in the sodium potassium, right? So the body's, when there's a lot of any mineral in the hair, you have to understand the body's using it as a waste product. So when people have a lot of inflammation, the main thing we see in the hair is more calcium. It's the first sign, like, why is the body dumping that much calcium, through the hair? Well, it's getting rid of something bad, some bad form of calcium in there, right? It could also be white blood cell activity because they use a lot of that calcium that we learned about the calcium wave, which I think is one of the coolest slides I ever saw on a Stuart White. It shows how, dolphins swim around the fish and cause a vortex. It shows a bunch of white blood cells going around a pathogen and spinning a calcium wave around it, and then the pathogen explodes.
Oh,
it's called a calcium wave.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I got the slides. I don't have the live GIF anymore, but I do have the slides from Stuart White. And Stuart, we want to give you credit. He had a giveaway. He gave away PowerPoints and PDFs and articles. And Stuart, we all thank you. All those articles you gave away, like, that's what I'm doing. Like, it's giveaway, open source, everything, right? And you can still make a living. So sodium potassium, there's also the food ratio. And so that's kind of what I'm here more to focus on tonight, but I'm going to show you now the share screen. And you can join the conversation, which is the wrong page, but we're getting there. So this is what you'll see in the science books. I have the sodium potassium pump up right now. And, we were talking about this earlier. There's no real proof. There's give me even this, it's like these little channels, and you know what these look like, Deanne. And so there aren't a bunch of pumps along here, folks. What we're seeing is the byproduct of a process occurring. And it's polarity, folks. So we'd like to see a certain amount of potassium inside the cell membrane and a certain amount of potassium in the extracellular fluid. You're not going to have a broken pump. That's a word metaphor for your ratio's off. Then we need to look at why. And so in the hair, you're seeing a certain ratio. In the bloodstream, there's a certain ratio. It'd be interesting to see what that ratio in the blood actually is. I've never done it. And I'm sure somebody's mapped that out. And then there's a ratio in our diet. And so in terms of you're making me scared to use yin and yang now. In the duality of things, I'll stick with duality.
Duality, yeah, that's good.
Well, there's different sects of Buddhism too. There's like the Orthodox, and this is yin yang things. Like, oh man, I didn't realize I'm pissing off a whole group of people.
I'm not pissed off.
No, but I could piss off a whole group of people because I'm so freaking audacious at times. So in the dualistic world, sodium and potassium are a dualism. They're a teeter-totter. So generally, and our cravings are based on this. Sugary foods are generally higher in potassium, and savory foods are generally higher in sodium. And what do the fast food places play off on this? If you've heard me talking, I've been talking about this for 20 to 25 years. They give you the salty burger and the salty fries, then you want the sweet drink or the milkshake. And your body will crave it. You'll crave fruit, you'll crave candy, you'll crave sweet chocolate, you'll crave a lot of water. And I was told to start looking at this in the macrobiotic school in 1995. Said, be careful, because when you crave salty, you've gone too yin. And when you crave sweet, you've gone too yang. And that's a great metaphor. That's been my life exploration since 1996. How do I live in this? And Deanne, you'll like this one remedy this guy had. He was so tight. He did too much salt. He smoked too much tobacco. He drank coffee, too many diuretics. He was all pruned up and tight. And the guy gave him an 8-ounce glass of apple juice, and all of his pain went away. Yin. I was like, this guy was the master of applying yin and yang, and these simple little, he changed one type of salt to another type of salt, and his kidney pain went away.
Wow.
Like $20 remedy.
Wow.
Glass of apple juice. At the time, a quarter.
Yeah.
I'm just like, are you freaking kidding me?
Wow.
Yeah, glass of apple juice. It was so simple. I was like, when
Wow.
he told me later, because I was his scribe, I go ask him questions later. I'm like, how did you know? And he goes, I just knew.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what he meant because
Yeah.
I was still in the studying of the numbers. And I go, how can you can just like that? And he goes, oh, you'll be 10 or 15 years in and then it'll come for you. And I'm like, and I was 5 years in and I was like, 5 more years. He was right. It was 5 more years. But one day I woke up and it was like instant recall stuff. And that's, I think for each of us, it sinks in and we do enough when we sort of master our craft. It's like, oh, it's like the oracle starts to speak and we get to step aside a little more. So this pump thing, I'm going to give credit to Jana Dixon, Janadixon. She has a piece called The Biology of Kundalini out there, .com on the web, and there's a PDF version of the book. Jana, I wish you would reply to my messages. I love you and your work. So this was written in the early 2000s, this book. And what I'm about to go down on this PowerPoint here, if you want to do freeze screens or whatnot, is you'll get a chance to read. I'm not going to read, talk about all this out loud, but I'm going to bring up a few key points to our talk tonight because we've really only got, it's 8:45, so we might extend it a few extra minutes to 9, if that's okay, and to get through some of this, because histamine is related to the sodium potassium pump thing. Stress, the kidneys are in here. Magnesium is related to this whole thing. The adrenals show up in here. Electric currents of living organisms are in here. Moving electrons don't carry energy any more than air molecules carry sound. When your brain waves are faster, your consciousness is slower, but when your brain waves are slower, your consciousness is faster, kind of shit. What? What did you just say? So ionized cerebrospinal fluid, heightened action potentials in nerves, the fascia having electric charges. And next week's talk, folks, how humans harvest light. Yes, sir. Or ma'am, sorry about that. Or non-binary gender trans out there. Gotta make you all happy these days. So, oh, geez. We love you all, no matter what your choices are. Just don't hurt somebody and we don't care what you do. Be whatever you want. Okay, so it says high stress increases potassium loss from the kidneys. Now, let's talk about that word stress to start there. So can anybody live a stress-free life? Can anyone? No. Let's go sit in a cave in Tibet and people bring you food all day, but that ain't going to happen. So my point here is we talk about high stress, we're talking about dysfunctional stress, right? Like going surfing to me is stressful sometimes, but in the end, it brings joy. And there was a Facebook meme I just loved. It says, strong men make, it's like a full circle thing. Strong men make like a comfortable world. A comfortable world makes weak men. Weak men are like the root of strong men, right? And it's like, and it's not gender specific, but the idea is, when times are easy, we stagnate. And then the people that step up, the spirits and the bodies here that step up, they make the world so quote unquote a better place through work and hardship. But then we strive for that peace again, but then the peace brings more stagnation. And then the cycle continues. There's those 4 seasons of life, right? The 4 seasons thing, right? So the body is using sodium and potassium in different ways. If sodium's more yang and potassium is more yin, you can think of sodium like I used to grow weed with high pressure sodium light bulbs. Very yang, right? And then potassium is called the radioactive element by an unrelated system through Bernard Jensen. Wow, they're both talking about the same thing. Potassium's yin, radioactive, and sodium's yang, fiery, like a light bulb, like phosphorus. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. So the body is using these forces we're seeing the body's balancing act. I think would be a better way to put it. Wouldn't you agree, Deanne? Like through these numbers and ratios, we're seeing these different processes occurring in the body. And folks, please, the chemistry is secondary to the life process, not causes the life process. It's secondary. So really, I had a teacher 30 years ago. She blew my mind. She said, it's all energy and frequency. I didn't believe her at the time.
Everything's energy. This is energy. It's just dense.
I didn't believe her, And then God went, oh, you think it's this, but and then the humility comes, the more I was a cocky motherfucker, but I was a bipolar cocky, because as cocky as I was, the shame guy was just as strong. And, when the bipolar thing would fall out. But during those manic phases I had, I would get hammered because of my just audacious arrogance. And God's like, my first realization was, I'm not the center of the universe. And I was like 15 or 16. What do you mean I'm not the center of the universe?
You're the center of your universe.
Exactly.
Just not the universe.
So I called that guy. Noel got a good taste of him in our relationship. I called him the king of the universe part of me. So you sit in these fantasies, like, if I was the king of the universe, how would I run this world? Kind of. So, okay, back to the point here. This potassium thing. So potassium is needed to keep the cellular potassium pump going. In the next sentence, this is Jana. Sorry, Jana, we're poking a little fun here. If there is inadequate potassium, sodium enters the cell, and sodium is an enzyme inhibitor. And then she has in parentheses, see the ammonia hypothesis in her book, Biology of Kundalini, page 20. When there is inadequate water to manufacture hydroelectric energy for neurotransmission, that's a lot to say in one sentence. So the nerves you could consider hydroelectric energy is how nerve transmissions occur in the nerve. Wow, that's kind of cool. Histamine is activated to release energy from other sources, such as from calcium bonds. In every calcium to calcium bond is 1 unit of stored energy, is her claim. Thus, the bones and the calcium deposits in the bones are stores of potential energy. I would state the bones are no different than this organite here. And that when we put pressure on our bones, it has the same effect as the piezoelectric effect when you hit a crystal. Some people don't do these experiments, but in high school chemistry class, I did this amazing experiment where this guy had a big old crystal and he had 2 wires going to a light bulb. And every time we hit the crystal with this hammer, the light bulb would light up. And that's called the PEIZO, piezoelectric effect. And that's the basis of what orgone energy, which, what was that cat who came up with all the orgone energy, organite stuff? He was a very famous German dude. Anyway, some of you know, well, we could look it up later, but organite, which is nothing more than crystals being compressed by resin. This is surfboard, boat resin. And there's a bunch of crystals into various types of crystals. And then it's also directionalized. There's a spiral of copper in here. So this is a very powerful piece. It's always near me because the computer's near me. So it sends out a torus field that it doesn't get rid of the bad energy, it just reincorporates it. And the problem with that is, if there's a problem, is every thought I have is creating my reality more rapidly with the stuff around me. And so I have to be really tight with being a little more vigilant with my thinking. So inadequate water. So the bones, you see, folks, the 4 main alkaline minerals in the body are calcium and magnesium, and they have a teeter-totter balancing, and sodium and potassium. So amongst your 4 main alkaline herbs, there's 2 paired that they have to be in balance at all times. And the calcium to magnesium ratio in hair mineral analysis is your blood sugar, the cell permeability to insulin ratio. So that tells you if you have too much calcium relative to magnesium, that's telling you that the process of inflammation from excessive blood sugar is occurring. And we all know how inflammatory sugar can actually be. Because what is sugar as a basic unit? It's only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's all glucose is. Very acidic, very reactive molecule. It's a hydrocarbon. So it's no different than oil, petroleum, in a lot of senses. That's why our body reacts so poorly to it. That's why 1 teaspoon of refined sugar upsets the immune system for 72 hours. You'll see an elevated white blood cell count after a teaspoon of sugar given to someone who hasn't been on white sugar. Most adults are so desensitized to this, I doubt it. So, actually, one of the ways you can tell whether you have inflammation or not is how high your white blood cell count is. Folks, if you're out there, it's one of the great ways to read blood work is an elevated lymphocyte, white blood cell count, and on any level, you're looking at potentially you're eating too much cooked food. And then they knew this in the 50s, and Edward Howell, Howell, wrote a book called Enzyme Nutrition about this research, that people were fed various types of meals. And I've talked about this a lot in group, that the more cooked and refined food people ate, the higher was the white blood cell count after eating. And so they called it digestive leukocytosis, meaning a syndrome of elevated leukocytes post-meal. That's all OSIS means. And you break down these medical words and they're just, it's so ridiculous. Like, how does this one sound? This is how I met Kelly Deary. I love this word. I hope I can get it all out. Idiopathic thrombocytotic purpura. That sounds pretty intimidating, doesn't it? So this is how I met Kelly. They were going to remove her husband's spleen and give him hip replacement and put him all these drugs for the rest of his life, basically, because of this. Okay. And that's when they came in and like, here, heal my husband. And I'm like, pretty intimidating word. Let's break that word down. Right. So idiopathic, the root of idiopathic is idiot, idio, which means I don't know. So anytime you see a medical diagnosis preceded with idiopathic, it means we don't know how it's occurring. So their credibility is,
it happens sometimes, you know. Their
credibility at that point, it's in the toilet. You see, they never want to say idiopathic, but the, what's the blood doctor's name? The hematologist. The hematologist who signed the paperwork, no less, regretfully yours, when they opted out of the surgery. No, he wrote a whole letter about what a mistake they were making and signs it, regretfully yours, MD, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Doesn't that make you just want to like, yeah, regretfully, what the, aren't you in the healing profession?
Revoke the license.
Yes. Regret. I mean, Kelly could. Yeah. You can get in a lot of trouble, I think. Anyways, so, okay, thrombocytotic purpura. So thrombocyte, isn't that a platelet?
And clotting, right?
Purpura is purple. So he was getting easy bruising. There's the purpura. That makes sense. And then no platelets. So it means it's all that big old diagnosis means, and they couldn't believe it. I broke it down in 5 minutes for them. I got out my Merck manual and the dictionary, and I'm like, watch this. And my medical. So all this means is a syndrome of low blood platelets that causes easy bruising and bleeding from a source we don't know how it's occurring.
Yeah, but it couldn't be anything like a deficiency of vitamin C or.
Well, this is where it gets better, folks. I wish. Okay, this is a good digression. So I'm looking at this, and I already knew what it was. It was sesame seed oil. Royal Leaf figured this out, and they used vitamin T. They were feeding people termites and curing the same syndrome back in the day. Vitamin T. It's in Royal Leaf's book down here. The one from Soil to Supplement, the spiral bound one they wrote. From Soil to Supplement. There it is. It's in here. One of my favorite books of his. Oh, brilliant book. Yes, you can. It's fucking brilliant. And there's a whole little thing there on sesame seeds and low platelets. So whenever I have a client with low platelets, it's a no-brainer to give them the sesame seed oil concentrate in standard process, and it always helps. And I already knew that going in. So when I saw this diagnosis and the whole idiopathic, the idiot doctor, idiopathic idiot, which I knew the guy's name, I'd call him out right now. Regretfully yours. You suck. I'll have to send this to him someday. And I'm looking at this and I go, well, okay, you've got low platelets, and let's see what are you eating, first of all? Coffee every day. And sitting at a desk all day in front of the EMS. He was a solar designer. And then, they would exercise too. So, but he wasn't giving his body enough nutrition to being in front of a computer and exercising. And so his weak link was the platelets. Everybody has their weak link when they're not nutrified well. And generally, most Americans should consider themselves iodine deficient and B vitamin deficient. Probably magnesium at this point too. Most Americans should probably consider themselves in general B vitamin and mineral deficient. And if you're not getting any fresh foods, you're also vitamin C deficient. Because vitamin C is the water-soluble sunlight vitamin, folks. And vitamin A is the fat soluble sunlight vitamin, not D. D is your sunlight filter vitamin. And that's Morley Robbins' work. Morley will give you full credit for that, the root cause protocol. That's the vitamin C is mine. That's mine. I take full credit for that one. So I tell people, like, what's the best vitamin C, Craig? And I go outside and I grab a plant and then I juice it and I go, there's your best vitamin C. Like some of the plants that I use, what I picked today, didn't exist 2 days ago. The leaves I picked today, they did not exist 2 days ago. That's vitamin C. Wow. Because the sunlight and the water and the minerals in the soil made those leaves. That process is vitamin C. Because vitamin C is related to sugar. And plants make sugar out of sunlight, water, and a process in the chloroplast. It's like plants are like magic, dude. And they have the same blood we do as humans. So the sodium potassium thing, you don't generally see plants very high in sodium. You see plants generally higher in potassium. So what did humans do back in the day? Price talked about this in Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. What were they doing for sodium, especially if they were more vegetarian oriented? Because generally animal meat's much higher in sodium than vegetables. That's why it's more yang in the macrobiotic view. So what were they doing? Like some of these peoples that didn't have any sources of sodium.
That's a good question. I mean, if they really
or iodine.
Yeah, where were they getting the minerals? Were they eating the dirt?
Oh, you're gonna love this. I thought you guys knew this. So most of the Indian tribes around the world that were too far inland, they would take a yearly trek to the ocean, really? And they would trade what they had for seaweed.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a very hidden. Price found it in out of his 18 tribes. He's native peoples he studied in his book Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. Probably the single best proof of modern refined foods causing problems, because he had it documented through the teeth, and the facial structure, and showed the degenerative process. And then Pottinger's cat, Frenton Pottinger, did his whole work on the cats, and cats couldn't even reproduce after the second generation being fed cooked meat and dairy. They had to have raw meat and dairy. It's a travesty. We all know this. People like Deanna and I, we know this, and we see like they're still trying to run through. For 50 years, I've been trying to run through this. Only medical doctors can prescribe supplements. They're running that through again. I just shake my head. It's not going to pass because it's so idiotic. So a doctor that has 0 hours of training in nutrition has more ability to prescribe a supplement than someone like me who has 50,000 hours. Like I think I got like 50,000 hours under my belt, or 100,000 at this point. And you're telling me this guy with 0 hours has more scope than me? Like, get the F out of here. What you talking about, Willis? So let's finish this. We're after 9 now. This could go on and on and on. So next week, I'll in 2 weeks, there won't be a talk next week, at least live. But I'm going to read something about histamine here. So folks, if you consider calcium in the bones, calcium has a lot of stored energy in it. You can see this from what we're talking about here. And then look at this thing I highlighted in yellow here. Histamine has the potential to release this energy so that active exchanges through cell membranes can take place. So it makes the cell membranes more permeable. So histamine does that. Mm-hmm. One example is a sodium potassium regulation. She didn't say pump this time, thank God. Potassium should be in the cell and sodium outside the cell, but when there isn't enough energy to keep the regulation going, she says pump again. She should have just said keep the regulation going. Histamine becomes active and releases energy for this pump. So dehydration, I noticed because I was a hay fever kid my whole life, up until about age 35, 40, I cured it. They're curing my gut. And that was, if I got dehydrated, I would have an allergy attack. And there it starts to make sense right there. Dehydration releases histamine in some people.
Interesting. Okay. And
she'll go on to say further, Deanne, you'll love this, that histamine also in the processes in the body will double as a neurotransmitter. Okay. Yes. So histamine is associated with an awakening state, an awakened being that's in a process of awakening. That's what histamine is a pointer towards. So when it's too much histamine, the person is in what she calls a hyper Kundalini state, a highly charged state. And when the histamine is low or too low, they're in a hypo Kundalini state. Fascinating. So this is where, see how this little sodium potassium pump kind of laugh out loud example turns into histamine and spiritual awakening. Like, that's why people hang out with Craig Lane right there. Like, who would have thought of this shit? And Jana Dixon, thank you for thinking of this stuff. Chronic dehydration, making the body resort to scavenging energy from calcium bonds, might be a leading contributor to osteoporosis. Just think of all those dehydrated old ladies with porous bones. Biology of Kundalini, page 175. I cited. I did a good job citing this one.
Interesting.
So she goes on to say, there's a few key points and then I'll end this. Magnesium is essential to regulating potassium levels and functioning of the adrenal glands. What? What sodium was? I'll just do a couple of highlights to get you guys all jacked up. The electric currents in living organisms flow simultaneously in two opposite directions. So there's that whole duality, you know, because both are positive and negative charges. I'll leave it at that, folks. A moving electron does not carry energy along any more than moving air molecule carries a sound wave with it. The charges wiggle back and forth, but the energy moves continuously forward. This is analogous to the way sound waves move continuously forward through the air, while the air itself wiggles back and forth. To feel into and connect with the future sense, the cells have to be made more efficient and cohesive. So we need to have our brain waves working well. She goes into the next sentence. And then here's the clincher. It's an interesting concept to contemplate: the slower your brain waves, the faster your consciousness. Consider millisecond dreams that seem to last hours. The slow wave packs more consciousness bytes per second. Modern humans think that if you go faster by stimulation, you actually just fry your nerves. But after a prolonged period of beta state, the ratio between sodium and potassium is out of balance, creating mental fatigue. Theta state resets the sodium potassium ratios in the brain cells. The sodium potassium levels are involved in the osmotic process that transport chemicals into and out of your brain cells. A brief period of 5 to 15 minutes of theta restores the ratio to normal, resulting in mental recharging.
Which is why.
Hence the nap.
Or meditation.
Or meditation. See, there's the proof right there. And that's what the old yogis said, oh, modern science will prove or validate all this. There's the validation. Because I get that mental fatigue in front of this fucking thing. And I go over here and lay down on this and do my little mantras, and sometimes I'll pass out, wake up refreshed. Too long, feel groggy. You know Lars?
Yeah.
Lars says when he's doing a work day, one of our contractor friends, you might not have met him, he says it has to be precisely a 15-minute nap. Because if I go longer, I'm fatigued. And less than that's not enough. That's exactly what she's saying here. 5 to 15 minutes of theta. What? And that has to do, so consciousness is tied in with sodium potassium ratio.
I'm surprised.
And then she talks about scalar waves. I'm not going to go into that. And here's where the virus thing fits in, folks. The last statement I'll make here, and it's cited in her book on page 452. Exocytosis. So that's not a scary word, folks. It means excitable, you know.
So it's outside.
Yeah, exocytosis is a process by which a cell releases large biomolecules through its membrane. So the action is through the membrane. Exocytosis. Wastes and salts, such as potassium, begin taking up increasing amounts of space within the cell. As a result, the cell's water supply is pushed out and the cell becomes dehydrated. At this point, the water we drink does little to rehydrate the cells. Here we're talking about this thirst. To establish cellular flows, we need to repair and protect cell membranes with fat-soluble antioxidants, use negative charge North Pole water, and eat plenty of raw remineralized fruits and vegetables. And that's why I use, there's a product up there, Vista One from Systemic Formulas, Super EFF, Cellular Vitality, raw butter. Those are the things that I do with this, because I get people that are dehydrated and they can never get enough water. That's why I gave you those, Deanne, that's why I give you that Aquan thing too.
Right.
Because that will hydrate you a lot more than the other types of water. The Vista One's the purple one. I'm gonna buy more of it, but that's called cell membrane regeneration. And you might want to get an account with Systemic Formulas. So folks, I'm going to turn the recording off now. We went longer. I usually do. As hard as I try, there's always so many to talk about. But tonight, I think that if anybody, generally get a few comments, and I'm going to encourage comments. So please comment, we talked about tonight, and throw in your own experience. Look at how sodium and potassium, then you throw in calcium and magnesium. We're talking about B vitamins, talked a little bit about vitamin A and vitamin C tonight. And then we're talking about electrons and consciousness, and all from sodium and potassium. Don't you love these community dinners? You don't know where they're going to go. So folks, I hope you enjoyed the talk. And I know that my average view time is up to 4.5 minutes per video now as YouTube analytics. So thank you for watching my videos a little longer, because I know they're long. Signing out.